The old school rule is, which is still going on today, is that capital hires labor. And we're going to turn that on its head, because as we, those who work willingly with inspiration and voluntarily, owning ourselves and owning our collectivity, as we can organize ourselves more effectively as a working model and a working collective, then we will hire the resources that we need, the capital resources, in order to do our work, and compensate them with some fair exchange, but we are self-owning of ourselves as human beings.
This is Peak Moment. We are living at a peak of human innovation, information, wealth, and health. But we're also at a peak of population and consumption, with rising temperatures and declining resources fueled by cheap oil and gas. Peak Moment Television, bringing you examples of positive responses to energy decline and climate change through local community action.
Hi, welcome to Peak Moment. I'm Janaea Donaldson. We're here on location in Eugene, Oregon, and my guest is Krishna Khalsa, who's got some ideas about how we can do things differently as we get into a post-carbon future. Welcome.
Thank you very much.
Thanks for joining me.
Janaea.
So, where do we begin?
Well, I was trying to figure that out. I really want to talk about food security as basically a collective enterprise, something that the whole community has to be deeply engaged in, and that is contrary to the entire culture we have.
Well, we've got few people trying to create food for everybody else.
Exactly.
And food is the first thing that came on my radar screen when I thought about peak oil. It's like, how do we, tell me what you're thinking.
Well, there's a number of ways of approaching this, but I want to talk about it first as a collective wide-cast enterprise involving everyone, and how do we get more and more people involved in our gardens, in our rooftops, in our outlying areas, that food is something we're all really used to be, formally were engaged in eons ago.
Well, not that long ago. I mean, most of American farmers,
well,
I mean...
80% maybe 100 years ago were connected in some way. But I think even going further back, that was still a very different culture than the original
our hunter-gatherers kinds of things. Sure.
But it's an enterprise, and I come from a background of an intensive practice of yoga, Kundalini yoga, meditation, a lifestyle of a Sikh, which is a very action-oriented lifestyle. It's very involved in living and doing the practices rather than simply meditating and living in a more quiescent or a passive way. I spent a number of years in a U.S. Army uniform teaching Army leadership with a beard and a turban. As I was approaching this irony of being a former hippie, going in front of a group of returning military people coming back from Vietnam and having some Army Reserve time to spend, and how I was going to stand in front of this group of people and engage them and establish that I was worthy of being listened to and having something of importance to impart to them. I was going back through my meditative practice and doing some study about method acting, and found out that Stanislavski based his method acting very much in part on the ancient traditions of meditation that were written 2,000 years ago by Patanjali, which is something that was right up my alley. And so as I discovered and explored more about what that might involve, we have these stories about the method actor going inside, becoming a tree on the stage, and it's really about accessing a state of being within ourselves, not doing anything but really being the tree by breathing, by just embodying all of the identity and the feeling of what a tree would feel like. And so I came to realize that the doing part of any activity is not even secondary, but tertiary, I guess you would say, to the primal part is to actually be who we authentically are. And then from that to really have the authenticity of our human identity. And if we really understand and respect ourselves and experience ourselves as truly human, I can understand you as human, and therefore we are the same. And so in that sameness, actions normally divide, but I mean, ideologies divide, but
Yes,
actions
yes.
can bring us together.
Okay.
But if we come together with a common identity first, then our actions can be much more in harmony.
So how do we apply that kind of model to the collective enterprise around agriculture that you were talking about?
Right. Well, largely it's a matter of telling a story. And the entrepreneur is really a storyteller. And in order to be present and to engage an audience, whether it's an audience of one or an audience of a room full of people or 1,000 people, we really have to, as those method actors are, we have to be who we truly are and to emanate the authenticity of what it is we're talking about. That means we have to spend a lot of time preparing and developing and refining within our imagination and within our own ability to live and walk the talk, that we're not just talking, but we're also walking the talk. And so it's the being that comes first. The interesting thing is that what usually happens in our social system, the way it's set up, it's pretty well set up to be, we're socially engineered to be have-nots. And so George Bush says that my constituencies are the haves and the have-mores. And he's very proudly saying that. Well, the haves and the have-mores are like the masters in our civilization, and the have-nots are like the slaves. And so we get involved in this dynamic of I realize that I'm deficient in something.
And so we've got scarcity.
So what can I do in order to have what I need so that I can be okay? We approach food more like an addiction.
In our culture.
Our culture approaches food like an addiction, and as food becomes more and more scarce, we see more and more of the ridiculous kind of antics that we're doing in order to create food as we imagine that it can be done, such as genetic modification and all of the ways in which we...
Well, our whole industrial agriculture is part of that
Exactly.
extension of, let's just put take our natural gas and create fertilizers and machinery and so on and get people off the land and reduce the prices and create commodity prices so people can't even afford to farm as the oil prices go up. I mean,
Thus
it's crazy.
Karl Marx. He was talking about this 200 years ago, exactly in the same terminology.
So how would you do it differently?
It's a great question. First of all, we have to start with who we are and where we are. And the real wake-up call was to realize that if our average food item travels over 1,500 miles from the place that it's grown to our plates, and maybe it's 10,000 miles if we're eating fruit from Chile or
Spices
Australia
from India,
or New Zealand or whatever.
Sure.
I mean, some kinds of crops are only going to come from tropical climates like cinnamon or whatever, but there's no reason why we need to be eating peaches from Chile in January when we could wait until July and we'll have them here.
Yes.
So as the fossil fuel resources decline, the viability of this kind of global food system, this capitalized, industrialized food system is going to become less and less viable. And so if the food's not going to continue coming from other places, then if it doesn't come from our local place, it's not going to be there.
Right.
And so we have an impending problem impending, which the longer we wait to address it, the less successful we're likely to be, the more it's likely to be a crisis.
Yes,
and
because we don't have any options. We're not creating flexible possibilities.
Right.
I mean, you plant an orchard, you got to wait some while before you get fruit. Being
hungry isn't the time to start figuring out how to grow the food.
Yes, yes.
So here's the dilemma, is that before we were aware that there was something that was likely to collapse, this current ironclad, armor-proof, bulletproof system that's been created called corporate capital industrial agriculture.
Yes.
Given the fact that if that system were invulnerable, then it might seem as hopeless now to change as it was in 1930 or 1955 or 1975. It's just gone on and on and on and on. But now we see there's a chink in the armor. There's a huge Achilles heel. There's a moment where that system is going to morph or collapse into something else. And the question is, what is that going to be?
And can we help shape that?
Well, that's the point about the timeline.
Because certainly the corporate interests that are doing agricultural now, I'm sure, are going to be working to survive.
They're working on that.
That's part of their modus. I mean, that's their purpose in being.
They're working on
is to
that.
survive.
But the thing is, if that system collapses, there is a window that is going to open up that will allow new things to take place, whether we're doing those things or someone else is doing those things. In order for us to be the actors and the participants, then we need to voluntarily put ourselves forward in front of the curve in anticipation of this problem and begin to do things now. We have the luxury of it being voluntary choices now. If we wait until it becomes a crisis, then voluntary options are off the table. Everything is crisis management and involuntary, and maybe it'll be slave labor. I mean, you go to the fields.
Yes.
But at this point, everyone can go. We can create a system now, just as they did in Cuba, since their own artificial peak oil. Maybe you've seen that film on Community Solutions.
Right.
It's an amazing story, and it's really the kind of model that exemplifies what is possible as an alternative to this model that we're living under very poorly right now. The health results, the lifestyle results, the economic results, the distribution problems. It's all a disaster. And so if we want to change that, we have the voluntary moment of opportunity now, because it's in our imaginations. If we begin to act, and if we begin to act voluntarily as a community, it can be a healthy community solution for us as well. But in the absence of our actions, because we are separated from creating food, we're separated from our own labor, we're separated from so many things that we're inclined to be passive.
And we have private ownership of land, and farmers take care of that stuff.
Right.
How do you shift those? I mean, yes, I can grow my own garden. Yes, I can help and do it with my neighbors, and we'll do a community garden, community compost. But the scale, but I can't grow wheat.
Exactly.
I don't have the space to have cattle. How, is that an expandable model?
Well, the question is, I mean, there's a lot of choices there, and I think it's interesting to go back to, well, there's a couple of questions. One is, how do we organize our work, our labor, collectively? And what should we grow? And what should we grow is based in part on what should we eat.
Okay.
And one size does not fit all in terms of what we should eat. We know from a number of different very fundamental health paradigms that people have very different nutritional needs. We have naturopaths are teaching a diet about blood type, and different people with different. Now, maybe I don't subscribe to that theory, but I look at Ayurveda, and Ayurveda says there are these dominant 3 types and then subtypes,
and mixes of
and
those.
they're antithetical to one another, and so what's good for you might not be good for me, and vice versa. And so we have this incredible complication in the middle. It's not just food as a generic item, but what kinds of foods. What is it possible to grow here? It's possible to grow many things here that we've never thought of, because they may not be commercially viable in this global thing, but they could be very viable in a local thing. We've wiped out thousands of species of heritage types of food types of different subtypes within the classes, like that are very healthy, but they don't have long shelf life. They don't have all of this commercial viability. If we have the seed stocks and the ability to bring these other kinds of
well, if we have the seed stocks and can bring some of those heritage plants, and if people have been saving them, as well as the knowledge for how you grow those things, we can broaden the variety that we have available.
Now, there are other choices too from a permacultural perspective. Annual crops that are planted by seeds every year are much more labor intensive than perennials. If you have an apple tree, the amount of pounds of apples you get from that tree versus the amount of labor it takes to maintain that tree versus growing the same number of pounds of some other carbohydrate food. So there's a whole shift that we have to rethink. So not only the types of plants we use, but the types of foods that we produce. We have to balance oils and carbohydrates and proteins, and where are we going to get minerals and antioxidants and trace elements. All of these are huge questions that we haven't even really begun to address. But we can start taking steps now in initiating things just to get us together as a community. And that's partly what we're working on right now, is just to awaken the idea that a change is coming. We have the freedom to make choices now, and how do we activate other members widespread in our own community to get on board with this. And this is where we come back around to the idea, again, of the entrepreneur as a storyteller. Because we have to go out and tell this story over and over again.
Yes, sure.
Or we're telling the story right now, and how many people are watching this and getting a glimpse that, wow, it's a wake-up. And once our minds are awakened to it, we start figuring a lot of this stuff out for ourselves.
I think we're going to need that kind of creativity. I mean, that's one of the gifts that humans have, is their ingenuity to bring to this.
Right.
You had mentioned an interesting story of a farmer who's got a great deal of orchards, right? Who has, and you have a different idea about what to do with that.
Well, he has a 33-acre farm. It's an organic farm. He's been out there for 25 years. He really always wanted to grow food for the local community, and found that the way it was being distributed from here, they were shipping his food, carrots and other things, to states that are far away from here. And he got very bored with that idea of enriching the lives of consumers in other states when he wanted to be enriching the lives of local people in his own community.
And was that because he was getting more money for that?
That's just the way the distribution was happening from here at that time. He's got a very beautiful farm. It's set up in a very permaculture way. He's got rows of trees and then narrow rows of other crops, so that you're not monocropping and you're not having these wide expanses. You can control pests and all that. But all of a sudden he got much more interested in bringing kids to his farm. Like Head Start kids, just to come out. They've never been on a farm before. They can get in the dirt. They can see the cows. They can pick some peas. They can pick some raspberries.
Eat them right on the spot. See where it came from.
They can pick pull some weeds. They really are getting the idea. This is where food comes from. It doesn't come from the cafeteria or the store or the refrigerator or a box. It comes from the ground, from nature. And so that's really what inspires him. And in the midst of all of that, he's got 600 organic apple trees and 250 Asian pear trees that are just fertile and propagating like crazy, but he doesn't have the time to do anything with it. So this is like a gift out of the sky. He says, Krishna, if you want to work with this process, those pears and those apples are going to fall on the ground. But if someone were to thin the fruit right now so that the fruit's there matures and gets much more ripe and sweet and so on, will optimize the harvest and then get the crop harvested. You can use this crop just with some kind of consideration back to him, some percentage of all of that. So here's this great opportunity to start. Now I have a situation. Now I can plan a project. Now I can create a story. Now I can go around town and start talking to different groups who have different ways of viewing this as a way that their family, their interest group of cohorts, or now we're starting to bring in gleaners from some of the rural areas who are going to be doing this work voluntarily on behalf of our local food bank, Food for Lane County. And so they're going to be doing this work, and this is going to be delivering hard fruit into the food banks. This is now going to the local people who really need food.
Fresh produce.
But there's many different ways of coming into this story, and so it means going around. I'm a member of the local Lane County Food Policy Council, and this is really the dire area I see, is to reignite local agriculture and make it a complete system that is capable of providing food sufficiency for everyone in this 300,000 people in this county.
Wow. So you need in your stories is ways to engage more people, for example, to get active with pruning this fruit and transporting it and gleaning it, and probably also things like preserving it.
So
drying
here's a
it,
thought.
and so on.
As I faced just the staggering dimension of this problem and realizing that, the current commercial way of producing food doesn't produce enough food for everyone.
Right.
How can all of us amateurs possibly do it any better, you know?
Yeah.
And what I've gotten very interested recently in Linux or Linux software. It's a free operating system. And I've been doing a little research on a story of how it was developed. Because this software system, which rivals, say, Windows in its ability to give us everything we need,
Right.
to really do good computer work, was written by a worldwide band of anarchist hackers who were volunteers.
Okay.
And in the course of doing this, they violated all of the known rules of corporate command-driven software development.
So they did not do corporate. They said, here, it's free. We'll all work on it, but it's free and available to anybody, and you can add to it, and you can change it and create something that works with it, and so on.
And I figured out some things about the way that modular voluntary thing works by people getting inspired about their craftsmanship to contribute to this little module, and I'm a part of this team, and this team connects with that team, and so on. And it obviously has created this unbelievable success that now even some parts of the worldwide internet are being powered, some of those servers are being powered now by Linux software rather than the other operating systems.
And you can see on the internet other enterprises where people are offering things for free. A lot of incredible amount of services just for, I mean, sometimes there's advertising so that you have to go see that, and sometimes it's just their generosity.
Exactly.
So you're wanting to apply that model, that kind of to food production?
Yeah, I can break down this farm into, let's say, all of the perennial trees on this property can even be given a name and a personality. They all are beings out there making food, making fruit. And so we create relationships. They're going to be there for 50 years or 100 years. We have time to get to know them. It's not like a stalk of wheat that's going to be gone in 3 weeks. So we start to build long-term relationships among ourselves as people and among these one-legged beings, these plants, these trees that are feeding us, and we start to build community in this way.
You make me think of things like the Heifer Project, where somebody, in this case, private personal ownership of this animal, that they can become food for their, or milk for their family, or fiber. That I just had this image of people adopt a tree, and learn how to prune it, learn when it's going to blossom and be ready. And I can imagine that, you know, schools and church groups and social groups can sort of adopt this little section and get to know each other as well.
Exactly. It's a very healthy thing. It's
so that they can both benefit. I mean, they can harvest the fruit, and I see that you, I mean, in your story, I mean, you got lots of stories you can do. The people that relearn the arts of drying or canning or making applesauce or whatever it is.
The other thing is that if we can learn to self-organize ourselves as working collectives doing work or labor, that in this system of economics, it's capital that hires labor at will and then fires them at will. But if we can effectively learn to become an integrated body of workers that define what our operation is, what our expertise is, we can hire the capital. We can negotiate for access to land. Because in a time in a post-carbon world, all arable land needs to be producing food. If you think you own land, but it's sitting there and it's not doing anything, then either by guilt or possible forfeiture, either you say, you know, I need to bring people in here if I don't know how to do my 5-acre hobby farm to make it do something. Maybe there are 10 other people that would like to partner with me. I give them access to my land, and perhaps as a part of that I get food that's produced here, so that provides security for the, quote, landowner, or the presumption of ownership of land, when in fact it is a common stock of all of humanity.
It has been historically.
That we the labor can hire the resources in order to do the work that we're committed to doing. And so that we don't have to be heavily capitalized to own this land in order to do our work.
So long as that, if the trades are good, I can imagine that some landowners, that would be a very welcome thing, many of whom need labor, particularly as we have less and less fossil fuel to run tractors.
We're doing them a favor, they're not doing us a favor.
That's a different, certainly the different angle on that.
Yes, we hold the cards in this case, because if it's a labor-intensive agriculture, and we are labor, and we're motivated by an elan that's more cohesive than at-will employment where there's no loyalty in either direction.
Right, that's right.
If we have the loyalty within ourselves and we create loyal bonds with the people who are caretakers for the land, and we're the producers, then we're creating something which is much more human again.
And certainly a different model for what I thought that could happen, a feudalism in which you've got the big landowners who have
Right.
the serfs working the land. I mean, you've
Right.
turned that on its head.
Exactly.
I want to see how you do it.
Great.
I
Let's
want
do
to
it
be
together.
part of it. That's a great idea that turns things on their head. We
Right.
have about 2 minutes left.
Great.
Are there little gems that we didn't capture that you wanted to?
Wow. There's a lot, actually. There's so much. But I think the other side of it is that the experience that I've gained through business entrepreneurship, that I've learned that there are ways of structuring business. I usually look at it as 4 quadrants, like the finance quadrant, the procurement quadrant, the operations quadrant, and the sales and marketing quadrant.
Okay.
Each of these are a part of every classic enterprise. Each of them looks at reality differently, and so they're pulling in opposite directions. And normally this would be seen as something which is breaking down the cohesiveness, but actually it creates tensions that are like bowstrings or guitar strings.
Or rubber band.
That are rubber bands.
You're connected
that
still.
we're using the energy. The more tension there is on that string, the more powerful the arrow is going to be projected. And so we all have to have the grounding, again, of this sense of being, so that we can engage in others who are polarities to us, that we're pulling in this to create a strength rather than an opposition.
That's a good model.
And
That's a
so
good
we call it
story.
diagonal management. And it's a way of capitalizing diversity and making it the heart of our strength.
That's really a nice image because we need all those aspects. And if we just know that tension is part of the dance,
Exactly.
and part of where
Right.
the energy is stored
Right.
and can be used, because we are so conflict averse in this community, you know, and don't know how to handle it. I think that's a
So if we're singing the
nice
same
image.
song or we're telling the same stories and we all have learned the story of our enterprise and we enhance it and we rebuild it and we develop that story as we go, then this maintains our unity and our inspiration.
This is good.
Thank you.
May we have a rich diversity of stories. Thank you for your stories that help inform this adventure and your consciousness about it. I think that the beingness that's at the core is something we aren't reminded of in our culture, and I thank you for that.
Thank you, Janea. Okay, pleasure.
This is Janea Donaldson, and you're watching Peak Moment, Community Responses to a Changing Energy Future. Thanks for joining us.